Where are the nerdy men at? Where are the nerdy men at? The ones who wear glasses, the ones who are into Star Wars, the ones who are into Game of Thrones, the ones who read books and build Legos. Like, where are y'all at? Like, I have a specific type that I'm looking for, and every time I like come across a nerdy man, he has like two of those things, but not all of them. And it's like, I need a nerd. And I don't just need somebody who like casually talks about things. Like, I matched with this guy online. He was like, yeah, I like Game of Thrones. And so I was trying to like go into what I liked about it. And the conversation was so surface level. He was like, yeah, it's just really cool. Okay, but what's cool? What do you mean it's really cool? What do you find about it? Who's your favorite character? Why do you like them so much? What's your favorite arc about them? What's your least favorite arc about them? Like, why are we not getting into things? Like, where are the men with the hyperfixations, okay? And like the men who build Legos, okay? Like, you don't have to, because I don't build Legos, but I want someone to build Legos for me. Where would I put them? I don't know, but I need the Lego flower sets, like, and they gotta have glasses. Like, I'm sorry, you got to have, like, you can't get me if you don't have glasses. I'm so sorry. And it's like, I'll meet a nerd that like he's like a computer nerd, but that's it. Like, he's not a full nerd. If you're gonna be a nerd, be a nerd. Where are the cute nerds at? I'm sick. I'm sick.
Every Bridgerton couple has chemistry that makes me want to spin on the floor like a goddamn breakdancer. I'm about to start flipping in the air like a tech deck. Where does Shonda find people who click like this? Where does she find Colin, stop it. I can't take it, please. If you're one of those people saying you don't think this season is going to be good, I can't wait until you're munching on those words. I hope they taste terrible.
So I've been in Thailand for a few weeks, and I was shocked when I came here to see so many Israelis on vacation, because I could have sworn that the narrative that Israel was selling to commit genocide on Palestinians in Gaza was that the country was under attack by all Arab nations surrounding the country, and that they needed to commit this genocide for the survival of the Jewish people in Israel. So I'm just so confused as to why there's so many Israelis in Thailand just vacationing like it's all good. I'm literally sitting in a beach and I see an entire Israeli family, tons of them, multiple families with their children, and they're all having a grand time at the beach. They have their little kids, and their kids look healthy and happy and well fed. And I'm just wondering, I thought that you were under attack. I thought that you were going to be exterminated. So I don't understand what you're doing here. Your country has massacred millions of Palestinians. You literally have a beach of your own. You have Tel Aviv, you have Haifa, you have Jaffa. You have a beach of your own. What are you doing here? And I think it goes to show that Israelis really are not experiencing the loss and the suffering and oppression that they say they do. It is all bullshit. They are not suffering. They are not oppressed. If you have the time to go and go on a vacation to a whole ass country, you are not oppressed. You are not living in fear. You are not suffering. And the fact that Israelis get to have a victim and superior mindset is disgusting. It's the fact that they can be, there's so much anti-Semitism in the world, and we're being killed and murdered everywhere. But then at the same time, there's a whole superior complex where you are God's chosen people and God gave you this land and you're on vacation as your country is committing a genocide. I don't think people even understand how small of a country Palestine is. Like, the country is so small, right? It's only like 2 hours away from Tel Aviv to Gaza. It is not that far. Like, the West Bank is maybe an hour away from Gaza. Jerusalem to Bethlehem to Tel Aviv, these are not 20-hour journeys. These are like 2 hours to get from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. So I don't understand why there's so many Israelis on vacation right now. Do you think that Palestinians in Gaza have the opportunity to be on vacation? Do you think that Palestinians in the West Bank are vacationing it up? Do you think Palestinians who are living in Jaffa, in Jerusalem, in Haifa have the opportunity to go on vacation right now? I am so frustrated and disgusted, more because I'm an American, because my American tax dollars are going to fund this genocide. And when I see Israelis on vacation, I feel so pissed. I feel pissed. America's infrastructure is literally collapsing in itself. Healthcare is collapsing in itself. Look, the Biden administration couldn't even pass a student loan debt approval for students. But yet, our tax dollars are going to fund a genocide. America just quietly passed a multi-billion-dollar weapon sale to Israel, including fighter jets and bombs and weapons. Israel just demolished Gaza's largest hospital, El Shifa Hospital, after a 13-day siege. Bodies of doctors and patients were found. All of the hospitals in Gaza are completely bombed. And I am looking at this Israeli family on vacation in Thailand. And then I open my phone and I'm seeing bodies of Palestinians in Gaza. Do you know how ridiculous this is? I have friends in Palestine who have never seen a beach in a day in their life. They lived just an hour away from Tel Aviv, and they are not allowed to go to Tel Aviv to see a beach. These people have so much privilege. You know, I have friends who who've been to beaches in other countries, but never have touched the sand in Tel Aviv, in Jaffa, and Haifa. Do you know how crazy that is? And I'm just watching this Israeli family be so happy, and they're passing out beers to everyone. You want a beer? You want a beer? Just going up to people at the beach and saying, you want a beer? You want a beer? It's like nothing is happening. Israel today bombed an Iranian consulate in Syria. If you are being exterminated, if you are facing an attack, you have all this time to bomb all these countries: Syria, Lebanon, the Iranian consulate, Gaza. This is not a group of people who are being oppressed. I'm so over the victim and superior mindset. I am so disgusted, and every American should be disgusted. When you see Israelis on vacation right now as their country is committing a genocide on Palestinians, just know that that is your tax dollars that could have gone to improving our country, but it's going instead to committing a genocide.
A 19-year-old girl is dead, and her sister has been gravely injured, all because somebody's dusty, demonic, troglodyte-ass son couldn't take no for an answer. And the discussions around this case have gone how they always go, with women expressing our fear and frustration over the fact that us simply leaving the house could place us under the will of a dangerous man, and men inserting themselves in those discussions just to say, not all men. So I just want to make it clear that if you're a man who chooses that position when we're talking about male violence, then it may not be all men, but it's definitely you. You may not be beating or killing women, glad for that at least, but you have identified yourself as a smaller part of an overall problem. Not all men, but a lot of you can't even condemn the perpetrators without gaslighting, deflecting, or being combative with women when we discuss these things. It's not all men, but most of you spend more time convincing us that misogyny doesn't exist than learning how to dismantle it. And the gag is that a lot of you will acknowledge the dangers of your collective behavior, just accidentally. For instance, when y'all say that women who wear revealing clothing should expect harassment because you know that men are socialized to feel entitled to the bodies of women, or when y'all accept being domineering, aggressive, or emotionally stunted as traditional traits of masculinity, a construct that many men base their identities around. Gendered violence is not a matter of isolated incidents. It's a societal issue that manifests in many different ways. We know that all men aren't abusers or murderers, but that alone doesn't make y'all safe. And choosing to play defense during discussions about male violence, something that is so pervasive that leaving the house at night is a feat for most women, does not infer safety. I also want everybody to stop using the term gender war so flippantly. Because if there's anything that we've learned in the last, 6 months, is that something can't be a war when only one side is amassing casualties. Children are truly the most oppressed group in all of society. So I finally watched Quiet on Set. It's a documentary about Nickelodeon, or more specifically the shows produced by Dan Snyder, and how the children who starred in those shows were essentially fed to the fucking wolves. They experienced emotional abuse, body shaming, degradation, child labor law violations, racial microaggressions, and they were made to participate in thinly veiled sexual exploitation and pedophilia. Drake Bell identified himself as the child who was sexually assaulted by Brian Peck, a famous dialogue coach. He was one of a few pedophiles that worked for Nickelodeon around that time. And not only did this sick motherfucker have support from many people in the industry, including at his sentencing, he only did 16 months in prison, and when he got out, they hired him to work at another kid's show. And we love to ask ourselves, how does shit like this happen? How does the abuse and exploitation of children go on for so long with so many witnesses and nobody does shit? How does even the justice system drop the ball when it comes to protecting these children? How are so many parents basically willing to pimp their children? Kids are supposed to be our moral center. They're supposed to be the one group that everybody agrees is worthy of protection. But time and time again, it's proven that that is bullshit. From the government to Hollywood to parents to childless people who don't even think kids should be allowed on a fucking airplane. We do not live in a society that protects or prioritizes children. And they are the most oppressed because they are completely reliant on the adults and the systems that surround them. They don't get to advocate for themselves. They don't get to vote or have opinions. They're barely recognized as humans. We see them as merely extensions of their parents. And the many ways that adults decide to fuck up the world will always be dumped on the heads of little people who can't do anything about it. So last month was also recognized as Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, so let's talk about some common signs of abuse. Disclaimer, you are never at fault for falling victim or being vulnerable to an abuser. Absolutely not. However, it can be helpful to understand certain things to look for when you are dating somebody. First is controlling behavior. This one can be hard to spot, especially in heterosexual relationships, because traditionalism and heteronormativity normalizes men being seen as authority figures. But your partner should not be your leader. They do not get to tell you what to wear, where to go, or who to hang out with. Speaking of who you hang out with, isolation is a big one. Abusers don't want you near anybody who cares enough to tell you that you deserve better. If you find that your partner tries to prevent you from hanging out with the people that you love, then that flag is bright red with sequins, jealousy, and or possessiveness. You know you aren't doing anything wrong or untrustworthy, but you're constantly being inundated with accusations. That is also a red flag, especially if it manifests in anger or invading your privacy. And lastly, any form or display of emotional or physical aggression. This includes kicking, hitting, shoving, name calling, or any degrading insults, as well as destroying your property, threatening you, threatening to harm themselves, trying to physically prevent you from leaving a space, trying to restrain you, belittling your goals or aspirations, and not respecting your physical or emotional boundaries even during moments of intimacy. All or even one of these things are common signs of escalating abuse. Y'all stay safe. I love y'all. Happy Women's History Month. What is a historical fact that you wish more people knew? I'll go first. I wish more people understood the history of race and reproductive justice and how oppression has been facilitated through the wombs of Black women. For example, the Hereditary Slave Law of 1662, which determined that your status as an enslaved or a free person is dependent upon the status of your mother. Even consenting to sex and reproduction were not rights that were granted to Black women, who were often forced to bear the children of their enslavers, or to be separated from their own children while raising the offspring of their enslavers. I wish that more people knew that the gynecological industry was founded on the torture of Black women. Enslaved women were forced to undergo barbaric experimental surgeries, often without anesthesia, which led to advancements in reproductive health care. I wish more people knew about Black women like Fannie Lou Hamer, who was subjected to forced sterilization, a practice that was once so common in the South that Mississippi gave it a nickname. And to this day, racism still creates a barrier between Black women and reproductive health care. Black women are 3 times more likely to die during childbirth than white women. We're also less likely to have health insurance or access to prenatal care. And statistics regarding poor outcomes for Black mothers and children are treated as a matter of individual or communal failure when they're really a result of inequity.
I'm presence in the room can communicate something that I don't actually want to be communicated, because I can't support it.
That was a clip from ex-gay, but still a stud, Pastor Jackie Hill Perry talking about why she would not attend a gay wedding ceremony. And her comment section was full of Christians talking about how they've been cut off by a friend or a family member because they refused to attend their same-sex wedding. What's killing me is not their refusal to attend, that's very typical. It's the fact that a lot of them were acting surprised or hurt that gay people would choose to not continue a relationship with them, as though that's not a fitting consequence for homophobia. Personally, I could never be the gay friend or family member in this scenario. Because if I came out here talking about how I don't think men and women should get married because I disagree with heterosexuality, everyone would think I was fucking ridiculous. And that's exactly how I feel about the premise of disagreeing with homosexuality. So unless they kept their beliefs as down low as Jackie keeps her lesbianism, I could never have a close relationship with somebody that disagrees with homosexuality. And I've even got pushback from a lot of gay people on this, telling me that, oh, well, they can love you but still disagree. Which is true, but in the words of Mama Tina, what's love got to do with it? Acquaintances and associates are one thing, because we all have to share a society with people who we don't align with. But you don't get to take up space in my intimate collective if the only way you want to see me experience romantic love is if I'm living a lie by marrying a man. Love the sinner, hate the sin, but if I say love you but fuck your religion, I'm disrespectful. So we might as well just not even do this. Also, I'm in the Atlanta area, and I'm so serious when I say, if you are a gay person who is having a wedding and your side may be a little empty due to homophobia, email me. Me and my people will pull up and be your surrogate family. I promise.
While we're on the topic of y'all forgiving and forgetting things way too easily, y'all are way too quick to forgive abusers just because they have tragic backstories. And before y'all get mad at me, I'm not saying this to downplay those tragic backstories and those horrific experiences of people who grow up to become abusers, but what I am saying is that just because we know that because you were abused, you are more likely to become an abuser, doesn't mean that we can just excuse that. That's just information that's important to keep in our pockets. Like, I'm thinking specifically of Drake Bell at the current moment and all of the conversations surrounding him and the documentary that recently came out. And while I can agree that what happened to him is horrific, like that should never happen to anyone, much less a child, we cannot also forget the fact that he is a groomer. I see so many posts about him that are like, oh my gosh, like what a sweet little sad potato. I feel so bad for him. I just want to comfort him. Ooh, little baby. And I'm like, did we forget? Did we forget? Or did we just move on? Because he also has a tragic backstory. Like, just because you were traumatized doesn't mean that you can use that trauma as justification for perpetuating that harm going forward. You are in charge of healing, even if it is not your fault that it happened to you. And it's not just Drake that y'all do this to. Y'all did this to R. Kelly forever. Y'all were like, oh my gosh, poor Robert. His childhood was so bad and it was just so sad. And yeah, he had no choice but to grow up this way. And poor him. Yeah, feel bad for the child. Don't feel bad for the adult, because the adult is in control of their own actions and the adult that they choose to become. And I don't know, like, while I can have sympathy for others, y'all forgive and forget a little too easily, I think, for me. No, we cannot just not talk about stuff because it makes you uncomfortable. We have to talk about subjects even when they're uncomfortable, even if it is, but not limited to, minors being intimate with other minors. Kids and teenagers, not the same category. I get it. I call the kids in my class kids, and I teach college. So like my kids are adults. I still call them kids. So I get it on impulse, but these are not the same category of people. These are 16, 17, 18-year-olds. But to that end, we should be talking about this in varying degrees with all minors, even kids, because it's important that they be able to identify their body parts, identify what's happening to them, identify if somebody treats them in a way that makes them uncomfortable so they know how to talk about it. If we don't talk about it, if we're just like, oh, I don't want to hear about it, so I'm just going to pretend like it's not happening, then we see what we've been seeing for decades, which is teen pregnancies, STD rates in minors, impacting their self-esteem, increasing depression, CSA happening amongst children and amongst minors. Like, we see all the bad stuff happening because we just want to be like, but that's icky to me, so I don't want to talk about it. And I get it. We don't need to get into the nitty gritty with them. We don't need to get into like the gory details, and we don't need to be sitting around thinking about it all the time. But we do need to talk about it so we can prepare our minors for becoming adults in the real world, because something doesn't just like slip on when they turn 18. These are thoughts and feelings that they've been experiencing for years now, and they need the resources to talk about it. And this doesn't just go for like X education. This goes for like every single topic y'all have deemed as like taboo or uncomfortable, from like race to issues amongst genders to a host of other stuff. We have to talk about what's uncomfortable so we prepare them for adults that exist in the real world. It is burdensome, it is undesirable, it is uncomfortable, and sometimes even a little icky, but we gotta do it. And the more we do it, the less of those things it becomes, and the more it just becomes a part of their regular education like everything else. Happy Easter/Resurrection Sunday to all the Christians out there. I hope you were able to use today to worship and commune and spend time with your families and eat a really good meal. Because while you were celebrating with scripture and Easter egg hunts and ham, Jesus' birthplace was being bombed in the ongoing genocide against Palestinians. The birthplace of Christianity, home to the oldest Christians in the world, oldest Christian monuments and relics and churches, is being destroyed, not in the name of religion or in the name of safety, but in the name of nothing less than imperialist capitalist greed. While we were sitting at home eating dinner, millions of people, Jesus's people, are being deliberately and intentionally starved in a man-made famine, and they are sitting on the cusp of a catastrophe that we cannot come back from. People are being massacred, having their lives stolen by bullets coming straight from the sky as they wait in line for aid, for flour to make bread. They are making food out of animal feed. We were sitting at home communing with our families and our children. Meanwhile, 17,000 Palestinian children and counting now belong to a devastating category called WCNSF, meaning Wounded Child No Surviving Family. And that's on the heels of the over 13,000 Palestinian children who have been murdered in this genocide alone, including the 6-year-old little girl who called for help as she sat in a car surrounded by the bodies of her loved ones. That call for help was not only heard, but help was sent, and her and that help were killed. And this isn't new. This has been going on for months. We've been talking about this since they bombed Jesus's birthplace on his birthday. From Christmas to Easter, this is still ongoing. If you are a Christian who had the blessing of celebrating Easter today in the safety and comfort of your home surrounded by your family, remember that the best thing you can do right now, the holiest thing you can do in Jesus' name, is to stand up for his home and his people. The criminal justice system being broken is not a defense for these well-to-do, hyper-famous rapists, pedos, and ex-offenders that y'all insist on protecting. It is not applicable here. And this can be applied to any of these famous, successful, awful men that y'all find yourself defending every couple of months. But since we're talking about P. Diddy and Drake, let's talk about them. These men are not victims of the system. Just because P. Diddy is black, it doesn't mean that the system got another black man. He shouldn't have done those things. They have to be held accountable. And Drake didn't take a plea deal because he's just some poor defenseless victim who just had no other option and just couldn't afford a thing. He pleaded because he did it. Like, if anything, if the criminal justice system is broken in this instance, it's in their favor, because realistically, they should have never been allowed to get away with some of these things in the first place, much less for as long as they did and continue to have careers afterwards or currently. Like, these are not regular folk. This isn't your friend Johnny who got pulled over for a regular traffic stop and they planted a bag on him. So now he's going to jail and he can't afford a lawyer or defense, so he either pleads or doesn't or whatever. These are not those people. These are rich, famous, well-to-do men who have a history of bad behavior. You cannot blame the criminal justice system in this case on them, because realistically, this wouldn't have happened had the criminal justice system worked. And in Drake's case, I know y'all are going to say, oh, but Drake was a victim too. Yes, sometimes, but not all the time. Y'all got to stop saying this because it gives other victims a really bad rap. But sometimes the abused does become the abuser. It doesn't make it okay, though. It's not a justification. It's just something to keep in our pockets when we think about how we can prevent this kind of harm in the future. But that man, that grown man who has a history of harmful behavior, is not some small being victim getting prosecuted and persecuted by the criminal justice system. And neither is P. Diddy. Like, just because he's black doesn't mean there's like a target on his back all the time. In this case, because of his money and wealth and fame, he did some of this, at least some of this. And they should be held accountable. These are not your friends. These are not people that you know. These are not regular people getting played by the system. These are bad people. And we need to operate accordingly. Happy Trans Day of Visibility. Just a reminder, trans people have been here, have always been here, and will continue to be here. And before y'all get all upset that Trans Day of Visibility is also on Easter and start the conspiracy that Biden made Trans Day of Visibility on Easter, let's use our thinking caps. Trans Day of Visibility is March 31st. Easter is a movable feast, and it happens the first Sunday after the first full moon of the spring equinox. So it moves all the time. This year it was March 31st, a coincidence. Next year it's like the middle or end of April. So it's not some great conspiracy meant to deter or diminish Easter. It's just a coincidence with the calendar. Now that you've taken a breath and unwound, know that the statement that trans folk have always been here and will always be here is not a radical or revolutionary statement. It is a statement of fact. And while we are seeing more trans and non-binary people, it's not like a new trend. We were trying to create a culture where being trans was acceptable and celebrated, and we were succeeding, at least for a while. And to get back to that, we should all be questioning our lawmakers, pushing back against anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ bills, and donating to different funds, especially those that support gender-affirming care. So to recap, happy Trans Day of Visibility. Yes, that day is also on Easter. That is what we call a coincidence. No, it is not radical that trans people have always been here. They will always continue to be here. Either make yourself useful or stop complaining. Happy Easter and happy Trans Day of Visibility. It's April Fool's Day. Don't joke that nobody's pregnant. Don't joke that nobody's dead. Don't joke that nobody's sick. Don't joke that nobody's gay and that they're coming out. Don't out nobody as a part of your little joke. Just, if you're gonna do April Fool's shenanigans, keep it normal, keep it kind. I didn't think this would have to be a PSA. I thought we were kind of past that. But the way I've been watching y'all regress backwards for the last 6 months, a year, we need the reminder. So, April Fools, don't joke that nobody's dead, nobody's sick, nobody's gay, don't out nobody, no pregnancy jokes. And nothing else just particularly weird. Just keep it cute.
The fact that so many people think Tony Stark was right in Captain America Civil War is the direct result of superhero movies getting increasingly more politically conservative from the early 2000s to now. And the choice to center the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe around the Avengers, a team that has always been super cop adjacent, was a very intentional choice to center the politics of this world, like in centrism at best. And it's weird to me because the superhero media of my childhood was absolutely radical, very far to the left. I'm talking like X-Men, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Spider-Man, Blade, and vigilantism is inherently anti-establishment. It is in itself a radical act of rebellion. It's not inherently progressive, and writers like Alan Moore have illustrated beautifully with stories like Watchmen how scary it can get if you go into like libertarianism and like hyper-individualism and like only I know what the people need and I need to enforce that forcibly over them. But the thing is, again, stories like that really position the individual as being the danger. Like we have now stories that are like satirical and subversive, like The Boys, that reiterate this like evil Superman trope that again is like individuals can't be trusted with that much power, which in individual like circumstances might be true, but it like fails on a whole to understand that systems in place are also fallible and are also corruptible and maybe also can't be trusted. And in fact, that's the reason why vigilantism exists in the first place. I feel like when people have this discussion, they get so hung up on the minutia of what Tony did or what Steve did or was Steve a bad friend? Those are conversations that you in theory can have, but don't really apply to like whether the Sokovia Accords were an ethical or correct or progressive movement at all. And they obviously weren't. Signing up to be UN super cops is not a progressive answer. Giving the UN like human weapons of mass destruction is never something that I would vote for. And again, the Avengers were like literally created by the US government in the MCU, and every single member is at least tangentially related to like the government or military service. But I feel like because of Cap's branding specifically, people want to label him as like the metaphorical emblem of like American foreign policy. But that's Tony Stark. And Captain America has literally from day one been anti-establishment and has been like defying orders and rebelling against the government. And it's so weird because Captain America Civil War is all about Cap's complete disillusionment with the government, which he's just seen be like thoroughly infiltrated by Hydra. And he's never at any point saying that the Avengers don't need any regulation or that they should be above the law. He's saying that the systems in place have been proven to be corrupt, and that's why he doesn't trust those specific systems, which again has always been super on brand for Cap. And I feel like superhero media has like consistently gotten less radical since the early 2000s and been inching towards this like centrist, you got to fix the system from within, like passive stance, like from Christopher Nolan's Batman having like an integral like relationship with the cops to do what he needs to do, to the MCU centering around the Avengers and now the boys. Like superhero media used to be about like radical change, starting with like building community with the X-Men, or Spider-Man deciding that the best thing he can do is help individuals in his neighborhood. Like the idea that it's not only okay to fight oppression with violent resistance, but it's also only one part of it, and that building community and support systems for people that the system has failed is another vital part of it is so beautiful. And it's not something that we talk about at all, because people are talking about whether the super cops need to be like government sanctioned or not. And like, not for nothing, Civil War is a much more complex issue in the comics because of the identities of like the mutants and characters like Spider-Man, who get royally fucked over by the Superhero Registration Act. And the framing of the movie, like I'm saying, is very intentional to make it feel plausible, to make you feel sympathetic towards the US government saying you can't be trusted, when a couple of movies ago, the US government's solution to the attack on Manhattan was to nuke the city. And this is when the Avengers were directly on their payroll. You can tell the entire political outlook of these movies is centrist, because even when they outright tell the audience the government is untrustworthy, the audience still says, I don't know, they're making a lot of good points. Anyway, I can't believe we're still having these conversations in 2024, and this is exactly why I am absolutely terrified to see the MCU ever introduce the mutants, because I am sure that the hot takes about the mutants on the internet are going to be atrocious.
Yeah, this is Buttercup in the first Hunger Games movie, and this is Buttercup in the rest of the Hunger Games movies. In the books, Buttercup is described as this muddy yellow cranky cat with a cropped ear. Clearly, he was not cast as such in the first Hunger Games movie. I think what had happened is that Nina Jacobson, the producer, had missed the casting for the cat, and then she got to set and saw that it was a black and white cat and was like, this is not Buttercup. And Suzanne Collins was like, that is not Buttercup. It was just too late to do anything, and they couldn't like digitally alter it in any way. Then when they hired Francis Lawrence, Suzanne Collins was like, we are recasting this cat. And Nina Jacobson was like, we are recasting this cat. And Francis Lawrence was like, okay, we will recast the cat. Because the audience would never have let them live this down if they did not make this change. But actually, fun fact, Buttercup was actually played by 3 cats. There was the black and white cat from the first movie. And then in the rest of the movies, they used a really mellow cat for most of the scenes with Buttercup. And then a stunt cat for the scene where they're playing with the light with Buttercup in the bunker. Too bad Apollo wasn't alive yet during filming, because I'm sure he would have gotten his big break.
Something I've been thinking a lot about lately is the concept of forgiveness and how it relates to ghosting. Ghosting is a phenomenon we see today in our interpersonal relationships. But I want to make an argument that ghosting is something that I also see people do when it comes to politics and social issues. I think everyone has at some point been ghosted by a friend, a partner, a family member, a loved one. And oftentimes it leaves the person who has been ghosted feel so insignificant, especially when you shared a special relationship and bond with this person. Sometimes it's your best friend, someone it's a boyfriend, sometimes it's a parent, who knows, right? How it makes someone feel is like so dehumanizing. It makes you feel like you are not respected and you are not worthy of respect. You're not worthy of closure. And it feels like betrayal. And I'm someone who has experienced this multiple times, and it made me feel so hurt. But oftentimes I was able to understand that this is just a reflection of someone's emotional intelligence. Maybe they're not able to give you something that they're unable to give themselves. But since October, since the genocide in Palestine, I see how people do the same shit when it comes to a live stream genocide. I see how easy it is for people to completely disregard and ignore a whole ass genocide that is being documented minute by minute and completely just go on with their lives. And this entire situation has made me become a more hateful, angry, and frustrated person, to be honest. And that is not the essence of who I am. I know that's not the essence of who I am. And so it's in a very uncomfortable position for me. And the thing about hatred is that it's like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. And I don't really know how to evolve this feeling, because I'm still witnessing this genocide.
And I feel so betrayed by the world. I don't know how people are able to completely disregard what is happening in Palestine, in Gaza. Yesterday, I saw a photo of a dog in Gaza with a baby in its mouth, a couple months-old baby, because the baby was the dog's dinner. Do you understand how like, I have no words. We are watching the depths of evil happen on a minute-by-minute basis. And I don't know how people, I do know how people are able to just ignore it, but I feel betrayed by it. I feel so like, are you guys for real? We're watching this in 2024 and we're not going to say anything. And it's like, we could end this genocide if enough people cared, if enough people were out in the streets. We could actually end this genocide, but not enough people care. And I think it's a reflection of ghosting culture, of how people treat each other on just their interpersonal relationships. So of course they're not going to give a fuck about people in Palestine. They can't afford to give that to someone else because they're not even afford to give it to people they care about. And it makes me not want to fuck with people. Like, and it's such a hard it's such an uncomfortable feeling because I used to be such a sociable person. I used to have so many friends. I used to love talking to people, but who the fuck am I trying to be friends with? Who am I trying to be in a relationship with? And do you care? Do you care about my friends who are dying? Do you even think about these children whose body parts are literally ripped apart? And I feel so much anger. And I'm trying to be forgiving because I don't want to feel this hatred, and this anger and frustration towards people. But I'm having a really tough time trying to evolve this feeling into forgiveness, especially when it comes to forgiving people who haven't ever asked for it. And that is the thing, is that the people who are often ghosted, the people who are often left behind, have to be the ones to pick up the pieces. And you have to find a way to live in this world. And you have to find a way to move on. But you have to first be able to forgive people. People who will never ask for it. So that you can live. And I sometimes think about, if this is how hard it is for me, I cannot imagine what it is for people in Palestine, in Congo, in Sudan, in Tigray, in Tibet, in East Turkestan. All the people who feel so abandoned because the world kind of just disregarded them and said, let someone else take care of it.
Absolutely nothing is going to make me start supporting Candace Owens. Nothing's going to make me like her, support her, stand by her, whatever. And if you know, you know. And that's because nothing is going to make me suddenly start supporting these right-wing celebrities and politicians, especially just because they're on the right side of one issue. Literally standing up against the injustices taking place in Palestine right now is like the barest minimum you can do. It's like basic fundamental human decency, especially at this point after the IOF has now raided a hospital for 2 weeks, a civilian hospital, burned it essentially to the ground, literally executed people in the hospital. Hey, we're acting like it's a radical thing to say that that's bad. Baby, it's radical to not say it's bad. And again, just because Candace Owens and all those other right-wing politicians and celebrities that y'all are suddenly forgiving and uplifting and supporting are right on this one issue, this one time, it doesn't erase all of the years of harmful rhetoric that they've been spewing, especially how often that rhetoric is anti-Black. These people are not suddenly good people who deserve our love and care because they can call a spade a spade. A broken clock is right twice a day. It don't mean it's not broke. Like, y'all's accountability for other people is so wishy-washy and so flimsy. And it is especially true when that person is consistently anti-Black. Like, y'all are just like, oh, just let the anti-Blackness go because they were right. Huh? I mean, y'all don't even stop to interrogate why they might start siding with Palestine in the first place. Y'all are just like, oh, that's nice. We should support them. We should just forget everything else. Like, what could they have to gain from that stance? Oh, it's us suddenly liking them and supporting them, which is good for their brand and good for their pockets. Weird. So I'm glad that broken clock is right here because, again, that is literally the barest minimum possible. But I will not suddenly start switching my allegiances because that is the case. That broken clock is still broken. Grown adults messaging minors, having personal conversations with minors, sending photos to minors is bad. Objectively, a bad, unacceptable thing to do. I don't know why, in people's defense of Drake Bell, they're like, okay, but they were just text messages. Like, it's not even that bad. It is that bad. He had no business talking to a minor. And I don't know why people are like, oh, at least he didn't essay someone, or at least he didn't grape someone, as like an excuse in this instance. Like, let's stop comparing and trying to power scale traumas. But that aside, that's still bad. What he did is still bad. Out of all the defenses for Drake Bell, and there are surprisingly way too many of them, this one upsets me the most because we can't just downplay what he did because it's not the worst thing he could have possibly done. There's always something worse that could happen. It doesn't mean what he did is suddenly okay and not that big of a deal. And as someone who grew up in the generation of Kik and had a lot of friends who were on Kik, having grown men message you and having grown man conversations with you as a child is a harmful thing, and it messes up your self-perception, your self-worth, how you maneuver relationships going forward. It's really quite bad. That's why it's a felony. And it's not just that it's an irresponsible thing to do. I do irresponsible stuff, surprisingly, all the time. I wait too long to get my oil changed and I sleep with my contacts in. But I don't message minors to have adult conversations because that's not irresponsible. That is harmful. That is bad. It's really not that bad is a really weird defense y'all have for a groomer. Like, really, really weird. Men are not stupid. Men are not dumb. These grown adult men do not have less education than the rest of us. They are not wandering the streets aimlessly, getting hoodwinked and bamboozled left and right, struggling to get by in a day. They know things. Then they make choices. And even if they're bad choices, we justify them by saying, oh, well, he didn't know, he didn't understand, blah, 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 blah. Stop. That grown adult man is feigning incompetence. He is pretending like he didn't know. He is weaponizing that incompetence. He can go to the grocery store. He can shop for himself. Because if he couldn't, if you weren't there, he would starve. And he knows that. He could. He just wants you to do it. That grown adult man does know that saying that mean thing to you will hurt your feelings. That's why he said it. And then you forgave him because he was like, I didn't know that would make you cry. Baby, he did. He chose to. All these grown adult men getting caught talking to little girls online all the time, including Drake Bell. Y'all are like, oh, well, he didn't know her age. Really? Even if I walked on that journey with you, that grown men are getting hoodwinked and bamboozled by 12 and 13-year-olds around the clock, you mean to tell me that at no point they learned any type of adult etiquette or online etiquette to not have personal, intimate conversations with people they don't know? Grown-ups? Really? Especially when these grown men are famous, you mean to tell me between years in the spotlight with managers and lawyers and powerful people in their corner, no one taught don't talk to strangers you don't know online? Be so for real. I mean, big or small, no matter what it is, anytime a man makes a bad choice, somebody pops out of the woodwork. Oh, well, he didn't know. Oh, well, he was misunderstood. Oh, well, he didn't know any better. Blah, 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 blah. Why is it that a demographic of people who have historically held more power than anybody else walks around in the most unknown? Be for real. Be serious. Stop letting them get away with all this weaponized incompetence that we know is happening because we get online and complain about it all the time, and start holding them to any degree of account in their own actions. Number one, please, 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 please do not act like people with intellectual disabilities are some type of hormonal raging monsters that just cannot be controlled. These are human beings, and while they might need additional support and guidance and care and resources, it doesn't mean that they are incapable of learning and incapable of self-control. They are not these monsters wandering the streets just terrorizing folk because they can't control their sexual urges. That's just not true. And in fact, this kind of rhetoric is inherently ableist because it strips disabled people of their humanity and serves as justification as to why it's okay that non-disabled people will institutionalize and criminalize and mistreat disabled people. Like, this is such an inappropriate path to go down. It opens up the door for discourse that A, I deem honestly unnecessary, and B, even if it was necessary, no one in this dialogue, myself included, is prepared to have it. And it's not even like a good faith argument to make when we talk about men using their incompetence to justify mistreatment and abuse towards everybody else. It's also just a bonkers whataboutism. When I say, yeah, men are using their weaponized incompetence to get away with bad stuff, you shouldn't then go, well, what about disabled people? It gives the same energy as, well, I'm making apple pie. And you say, well, what about people who are allergic to apples? Huh? Y'all hurt my head looking for loopholes to justify misdeeds and misbehavior. And along the way of hurting my head, you're also hurting each other and other people. Stop it. I'm gonna be honest. People have never been so mean to me or treated me with so much disrespect in my comment sections, in stitches on my videos, in replies, than since I told y'all I was pregnant. And as a darker-skinned, outspoken woman, a lot of people weren't holding me in super high regard in the first place. But ever since y'all found out I'm pregnant, comments have been crazy. And what gets me the most is that most of the hate comments and the judgment and the cruelty that I've been receiving isn't coming from men, isn't coming from the same dudes I'm usually duking it out with. It's coming from women, almost exclusively Black women. This isn't about Black folk. This is about women and community. And I am fascinated and stunned by just how quick the community will turn on you when you make a choice that they wouldn't have made. I don't know if it's because I'm just a tiny bit more open about my relationship than I have been in the past and people just don't like it. I don't know if it's because I am now visibly pregnant and excited about it, even though I'm a single mom in it. I don't know if it's because people don't like men so much that they're misplacing that hatred onto the closest lightning pole they can think of, and that's just me and other women in my position. I don't know. But I will say, for all the conversations about decentering men and women need to only depend on each other and we need to be a community and blah, 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 y'all are real quick to turn your backs on pregnant women. And again, this is a some not all scenario. In fact, most people have been kind to me, if not pretty excited. But I have seen a drastic uptick in just how many hate comments I'm getting and how many videos about me I'm seeing that are in a negative light, that take what I'm saying out of context. Hurtful comments, hurtful DMs, all of it's rising the rounder I get. And I have nothing to say about it besides it's kind of sad and just one of those things I wasn't expecting. So far, the hardest part of my pregnancy is not the back pain or the roller coaster of emotions or the breakup or learning how to maneuver going forward. It's the way that other people have been treating me. Otherwise, this experience has honestly been a joy. I got called to pick me for the first time in my life today, and a part of me giggled because the commentary came from a person who doesn't know me or my situation or most of the video that I made. They just stitched a part of it and was like, this is a modern day pick me. And a part of me giggled, but it also reminds me of how quick we are to judge and condemn people we don't know online. So I made this post that was like, women don't deserve shame and condemnation for being in relationships with less than great people and trying to tough it out and the relationship not working out. And what stuck with me is people's reaction to that. Because people were like, oh, well, you should just leave after the first red flag. And in theory, you're absolutely correct. But people are doing that thing that they do constantly online where they see it in black and white. And what that does is strip away any reality of the situation. If you go on a date with someone, or even a second and a third date, and everything's great, and then a red flag pops up, are you going to leave right away? In theory, yes. In execution, not many people do. They try to give people that grace to make a mistake. But that shouldn't be a pattern that you set. And if it is and your relationship doesn't work out, it's not then your friend's job to come in and pick up your pieces. And while that's absolutely a boundary that needs to be set and a conversation that we as a culture need to be having, what I also said is that women should not be shamed and condemned just for trying to make it work. I recently saw a video of a woman complaining over the fact that her husband didn't help her pump gas, and the comments were so mean. They were calling her stupid. They were saying she had no self-worth. They were like, well, what are you complaining to us for? You're not going to leave him over pumping gas? Probably not. And it just felt so mean that a person who was just coming to complain, like many of us just like to complain, we complain about celebrities all the time and they don't have a clue who we are, was suddenly belittled and demeaned because she wasn't filing for divorce over him not pumping gas. And that's what I mean when I say we shame these women and we condemn women for being in relationships with guys who aren't always, the perfect storybook partner. And I'm not saying there's not room for dialogue or room for the call out like, hey girl, you're still with that awful dude, you should leave him, or I can't always be here to pick up the pieces for you, for sure. But shame and condemnation, the drastic leaps and bounds that people take, that many of the people who follow me at least have seen in my own comment section ever since I announced that I got pregnant, and not a minute sooner. Yeah. And I just don't know if it's really the feminist thing to do to condemn and shame women for not operating in the way that we would operate, because we don't do the same thing to men. And again, this is not me justifying staying with your toxic partner or putting yourself in harmful situations and then asking your friends and depending on your friends and the women around you to come be your community when it inevitably doesn't work out. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that y'all are not quick to put up boundaries. Y'all are quick to exile. Y'all are quick to demean. Y'all are quick to add hurt on top of hurt. And I'm just saying, women don't deserve that either. Somewhere between A and B has to be the middle ground of community care, support, but also tough love when needed. And to that, I got called a pick me. And I'm okay with that. But I do want us to interrogate a little bit as to why.
What's something that movies get wrong that drives you crazy, but other people don't care about at all?
So I love every single stitch of this video. I watch pretty much everyone that comes on my For You page. And I think it's really cool to see people share their own expertise, their own knowledge. But it's really interesting because the nature of this trend is about correcting inaccuracies in movies, right? But the thing is that I think a lot of people don't realize is that sometimes movies are inaccurate on purpose. And the accuracy of these things is about communicating visual storytelling. And the movies would be worse if the accuracies were there. The visual language of storytelling is so important. I've seen people talk about how every time they see period costumes on screen and they're depicted as being incredibly restrictive and uncomfortable, and that's not true. Many women may have totally found corsets comfortable. They may have functioned more structurally as a bra than anything else, but a lot of women today don't even like wearing bras because they're incredibly restrictive. And the visual shorthand that's communicated to an audience when you see a young girl being laced into a corset and being upset about how restrictive it is and how limiting it makes her life, that is conveying to the audience that the themes of the story, that that women were constricted just by nature of being women, that women lacked the freedom of men of the time. And being able to have that visual shorthand is not only a form of artistic expression, but it's much more graceful than having characters painstakingly say their thoughts and feelings out loud. That's a thing a lot of the time is characters don't have an internal dialogue that's running all the time in filmmaking for audiences to know exactly what they're thinking. The original guy who made this video, his video is about how mics will give feedback and make that really uncomfortable screeching sound when a character is intentionally being portrayed as awkward on stage. And it's frustrating to him because being awkward doesn't cause that feedback. But that's actually a beautiful form of giving the audience insight into how a character is feeling. That quick little thing, showing a character on stage being awkward, not having his timing right, and getting some feedback on the mic that makes the entire audience aware of how uncomfortable that character is in that moment. That's so much easier than trying to explain an internal dialogue to an audience. So in conclusion, this trend is really cool, and this certainly doesn't apply to all inaccuracies in film. There's certainly things that are fun to point out and notice that are incorrect, but a lot of times inaccuracies are intentional or artistic choices to help the audience resonate with and understand the characters better, or in a intentionally artistic way. And that's really cool.
Here are albums that I think were unfollow-upable, and then I'm gonna discuss whether the artists properly followed them up or not. Okay, when I say unfollow-upable, I mean they just cooked so hard on this one thing that the bar for the next one was nearly impossible to achieve. Okay, first we have Control. If I made this and someone said, you have to make another one, you have to keep making that after this, I'd be like, why? Did y'all see how I cook? Yeah, this album was just so good. This is debut excellence to me. She did something very serious here. I think this is such a good album, but album specifically as a collective body of work, this was so good. The vocals, the writing, the production, I loved everything about this. Literally 10s across the board, no notes.
And I know, like, to start off like this with a debut, like, that's gotta be daunting. Because I know that people are always, like, really harping on the sophomore albums. This has to be, like, crazy to have in the back of your head. Was it followed up? I think yes. I think that she cooked once more. Control is still my personal favorite, just because I have just the personal ties I have to it, I think. But I think SOS is an excellent sophomore album. It was an excellent follow-up to Control. It is so SZA and also different from Control in a lot of ways. I think this album is probably more commercially appealing maybe than Control. Like, I guess we could tell from like the numbers difference, and also like SZA is much more well established at this time, and it took her a minute to cook this up. As we see, this is 2022. The other Control came out 2017. Like, she said, you're gonna have to give me some time, you're gonna have to let me simmer. But we did, and she cooked. So I think yes, I think this was followed up. Okay, next we have Pop Bible Melodrama. This, oh my god, this was something so serious. Like, everybody remembers where they were. Sorry. The production on this, crazy. The writing, the concept, everything about this is so gag worthy to me. This cultural moment. This was a cultural moment. Like, it's just banger after banger after bang. Where's the skip? Show me the skip right now. The concept of like the songs being kind of like stages of a party. Like, I was gagged. I love a concept album. This was just so fun and so pop. I loved it. I think Liability is one of the best ballads of recent years. Like, this was something so serious. But the question is, was it followed up? Okay, and then after that, Lorde released Solar Power. I say this as a huge Lorde fan. I'm gonna say that it was not followed up. But I do also think that Solar Power is kind of a necessary step in Lorde's evolution, if that makes sense. I think one of the reasons that this album didn't do as well, like commercially and stuff, was because like the image of Lorde, or like the character that exists in the other Lorde albums, you have Pure Heroine, where it's like, I'm just a normal girl from the suburbs and I'm writing about being from the suburbs and nothing ever happening. Oh, maybe I probably have to blur out her butt in the front. I'll put text over it, lol. And it was very much like making something out of the mundane. And then like Melodrama is this very kind of colorful take on like sort of a breakup album, kind of just like, she takes you through this party as someone who's like introverted and all these sort of things. And though that person is very different than, I guess, I don't know if the narrator is what you would want to call it, but the character that kind of exists in Solar Power. And I know a lot of it is meant to be satirical or like kind of poking fun at that kind of lifestyle, but it doesn't feel satirical, if that makes sense. With that said, I think there's some very, very beautiful songs on here. Stone at the Nail Salon, I think, is absolutely stunning. I think that song is gorgeous. I also like Melodrama is such an impossibly high bar that I don't even know what she could have done. But also like this album sonically, huge shift from Melodrama. And I guess that Melodrama style of music is something that I would definitely prefer to this. It's much more stripped down, which I don't hate, but it wasn't quite clicking for me. I also think this is an album for a stage of life that I haven't reached yet. I'm 22 years old. I feel like Pure Heroine is for high school and like Melodrama is kind of for college. And I feel like I need something that's like still for college, maybe still for later college. This feels like something that I could get into in like 3 to 4 to 5 years. Okay, next we have Sour. And if you want to be like, oh, like album excellence, you're putting Sour on this. Yes, I am. No one has done this ever before. And I don't know if we will see someone do it anytime soon again. This is a debut album, right? I think 4 or 5 of these songs on this one album that has, I believe, 11 tracks have over 1 billion streams. That's 1 billion with a B. That's a 1 and 9 zeros. That's almost 50%. Almost half of the album songs have over 1 billion streams. Do you hear what I'm saying? Whether you want to admit it or not, this was a cultural moment. You have to admit that. I'm sorry. I think this album was incredibly cohesive. It's great. It's really good. All the songs seem very authentic. You can tell that she champions songwriting. And I like how she doesn't necessarily, I wouldn't say quite plays with genre, but she does kind of a little bit like dip her toe into that like pop punk that we see a lot more later on, but I'll get there. I also think the production on this, so great. Really, really great. All the songs I think are made better by the production. The production adds some like intrigue to them, which I think is really good. Because I think there are times where people like overproduce things or things like that, and it kind of takes away from the song itself. And I think because Olivia is a songwriter first, I think, and that's how she has described herself. I think that like overproduction and stuff like that, though this girl can sing, don't get me wrong, this girl can sing. But I think that sometimes like overproduction and things like that take away a lot from like what the singer is actually saying, and they don't do that in this album. But this was literally like level 10 on the country scale. Like this was something serious. And as always, the question is, was it followed up? And a few years later, I think 2 years later, we get Guts. And in my opinion, yes, I think this is a good follow-up. Even though I returned to Sour more, I think I like Sour more just personally. But this, I feel like, is very much a step forward in the right direction for Olivia Rodrigo. I think the worst thing that Olivia Rodrigo could have done after Sour is make Sour 2. And she did not make Sour 2. Now, I know originally when like the album covers came out, people were like, oh my god, this just looks like Sour again. Or when like, I guess Vampire was the only single, they're like, oh, she's just gonna do the same thing. And I don't think she did the same thing at all. You can hear like the growth in her voice and the growth in her like specific sound. Like this very much feels like her coming into her own, and it feels authentic. Because totally what she could have done is made a bunch of radio bait and been like, here, play these pop songs on your stream, like, girl. And I'm really glad that none of these songs read that way. Like, you know, you just hear a song, you're like, oh, they made this like just so the radio could spin it over and over and over and over and over again. But yeah, this feels like her figuring out who she is as an artist, which I think is a good step forward as the second album. It still has that heart, that songwriting that you got from Sour. I think the production, it feels a lot more live, I guess. I don't know why I'm doing this with my hand. I think it feels a lot more live than Sour. Like a lot of them sound like they were recorded like one take live band in a room. And yeah, like even though I think this is a shift from Sour, I think they both seem very authentically her. So I think this was a good step forward. Okay, I could do more albums, but I realize I've been talking for a while. But yeah, I feel like there's so many albums like this where I'm like, you cooked to a severe caliber. And I personally would be worried if I had to do something after that. Like, damn. And also, in defense of Lorde, if I did Pure Heroin to Melodrama, oh, cooked. You cooked. And that was something serious. I could also talk about that transition. Because, like, pre-Melodrama, Pure Heroin, you were like, oh my god, you cooked so bad. And then you got Melodrama, and I'm like, oh, you cooked even harder. So that's why I started with Melodrama, because that's just like, it's so pop Bible to me. It's so pop Bible, sorry.
Jennifer's Body is one of my all-time favorite movies, and writer Diablo Cody recently said that her new film, Lisa Frankenstein, takes place in the same universe. Now, I've seen both of these movies, so this is my honest review. Now, I absolutely love that Jennifer's Body has become so well-loved and respected that its association with this movie by having the same writer and having a similar subject matter has been like one of the main talking points and marketing strategies. But I think it's important to note that the tone of this movie is vastly different from Jennifer's Body. Diablo Cody obviously has a very distinct writing style, and this film does have all the things you would expect. Very fast-paced, witty, referential humor, and it does in a lot of ways feel like a spiritual sister film to a film like Jennifer's Body, but the films that this film is referencing, the execution and style of the director Zelda Williams feel very, very tonally different. And I just think that's important to know going in, because that was one of the big pitfalls with Jennifer's Body, is people went in expecting something different than what it was. That being said, this film is so much fun. As somebody who loves 80s horror comedies, this film felt like a loving, nostalgic homage to films like The Burbs and Heathers, and even like Death Becomes Her. Like, this film embraces the zany and ridiculous in a way that feels so genuine and fun. And people love to throw around the word camp these days. I feel like it's lost a lot of its original meaning, but this film really embraces like all of the best things that make like horror B movies camp. Like the silliness, the whimsy, the self-indulgence, it's all there. And while I do think that this film could have kicked that element up even more and embraced even more of this like absurdist comedy and these over-the-top characters, I do think that the way Katherine Newton and Cole Sprouse absolutely threw themselves into these characters with such vigor and like genuine authenticity makes this film work so well. Like, honestly, I almost want to compare it to one of my other favorite films, Labyrinth, which is insane because those are literal Muppets, but the physical comedy on display here and the way that these two embody this kind of like earnest silliness is so endearing and charming. Honestly, everyone on the cast did such a great job, like giving 110% commitment to these characters that feel ridiculous on paper, but that's why it works. It works so well. It's also really cool to see Zelda Williams come out of the gate with a directorial debut that is so stylistically distinct. Like, it's so clear that she had a very clear vision of what she wanted to do, and she executed it like with absolute precision. I am very excited to follow her career from here on out. I know the reviews on this are going to be mixed because this genre always gets mixed reviews, but I, for one, am always excited about more entries into the weird girl romance genre. It's a personal passion of mine. So I had a lot of fun with this. I hope you do too. The Moana 2 announcement makes me really concerned for the future of Disney animation, and it makes me really sad to say that. As somebody who has a degree in animation, as someone who, like almost all of us, grew up watching Disney animated movies and they had a formative impact on me as a child, like, this is really worrisome and kind of sad. It was really shocking to everyone yesterday when they announced that not only were they making a Moana sequel, but it was going to be coming out in November, in 9 months. And that's because they had no plans to make a Moana sequel movie until it was revealed yesterday on a shareholders call by Bob Iger that the original Disney Plus series that they've been working on for a while now is going to be converted into a theatrical release movie. And that's already not super great because all of the work that has already been done on it, and trust me, it must be a lot of work. Animated movies take a long time to put together, was done under the pretense of this being a TV show, meaning the people that worked on it get paid less. They had cast new actors for Moana and Maui. Auli'i Quavalio and The Rock were not planning on coming back. They are only now in talks to reprise their roles, and they will presumably have to re-record all the dialogue that has already been done by voice actors who were hired to replace them. Lin-Manuel Miranda is not coming back to write the songs, and I know the internet loves to shit on this man right now, but he is undoubtedly talented, and specifically the Moana soundtrack is one of the best Disney soundtracks of this century so far. This project was originally designed to be shoved on Disney Plus and placate kids who like Moana already. Like, the kind of care that goes into a Disney original animation studios movie is not the kind of care that's given to these series, and trying to take a long-form sequential TV show and shove it into the mold of an hour-and-a-half long narrative feature film like that, I'm just very concerned about this project already. And it's not like Disney said we're doing this because we don't believe in our original projects, but that's certainly what it feels like, because last year both Wish and Elemental underperformed domestically. Elemental ended up having a very lucrative run overseas, but it looked for a long time like it was going to be a flop, and it did not do well in the US market, which is a very strong market for Disney. And their entire slate across Disney Animation Studios and Pixar Studios that they've announced as of now are sequels, other than Elio, which is coming out in June 2005, but they've announced Zootopia 2, Moana 2, which is now coming out this year, Inside Out 2 is coming out this year, there's a live-action Mufasa Lion King prequel movie coming out this year, Zootopia 2, Frozen 3, Toy Story 5. The only original Disney animation movie studios they've announced is an untitled project to be released in 2026. And it's not that their sequels can't be good or beautiful. Like, Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3 upped the ante on each other. I'm probably the internet's loudest Frozen 2 defender. It's just that when the studio that consistently for nearly a century has been setting the industry standard as far as innovation and groundbreaking original animated stories is resorting to solely just mining their old IP, desperate for a hit, it's a little concerning. And don't get me wrong, I love seeing smaller studios step up to the plate. Like, I am the biggest Laika fan. I love stop motion. I love seeing 2D have an indie resurgence with studios like Cartoon Saloon and movies like Song of the Sea. I love seeing the innovative stuff that Sony's doing with like Spider-Verse or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Mitchells vs. the Machines. But I think when you have this like titan of industry that is Disney animation, and now they folded in Pixar too, resorting to like just trying to appeal on a consumerist level to an existing fan base, and that's their main priority, it's just undeniably bad for the industry as a whole. It feels like they're kind of floundering a bit. Like, I just found out that they are releasing Turning Red in theaters for the first time now, because obviously it released on Disney Plus because of the pandemic, but it's in theaters right now. I haven't seen any advertising for this. Luca is being released in theaters next month. I don't know. I'm still excited for Pixar's original Elio. I'm still excited for Inside Out 2. I love the first Inside Out. But I don't know. It feels like these studios are learning the wrong lessons. Like, after this year and the recent years where their big IP projects are underperforming, I don't know why they're clinging so hard to the skeletal remains of, like, the fountain of IP. Like, clearly people want original stories, and I don't know, it makes me sad. I really hope that this is not the way we're going. Saying it's just a kid's movie, it doesn't have to be meaningful or good or important or valuable, is probably the laziest and most disingenuous way to engage in any kind of media discussion that I can possibly imagine. Like, yes, it is obnoxious when adults are overly or exclusively attached to children's media and refuse to engage with anything targeted at an older audience. That's annoying. That's an extreme. But children's media is incredibly important, and just because something is for kids doesn't mean that it should just be shit. By that logic, we should just let our kids sit in front of YouTube and just scroll like mindless, monotonous fucking like Temple Run videos. Like, no, children's media probably shouldn't specifically be trying to challenge adult minds, but it is arguably the most important form of media in terms of like making sure it's done thoughtfully and with intention, because children's minds are super malleable, and the media that we consume as children impacts us so hugely. I think about movies and TV shows that I see in adulthood that I feel like fundamentally change me, that impact my life and my soul and my existence greatly, and none of them hold a candle to the experiences I had as a child with movies that challenged me and helped me understand myself and the world better. Like, that is such a formative and important time for children that dismissing children's media as unimportant just because sometimes adults get a little bit annoying about liking it too much is so ridiculous and reductive. Mr. Rogers, Jim Henson, there are so many brilliant creatives who fundamentally understood that in order to make children's media that was meaningful in any kind of way that would resonate with children was to meet them on their level, was to not talk down to them, was to really understand that these are developing minds that are capable of much more complex thought than most adults are willing to give them credit for. And that's why children's media still resonates with adults when it's done well. And furthermore, I know the example in my last video is not the best example of this because Disney really does seem to primarily target children as their core audience. But animation in general is not a medium that should just be relegated to children's media. Like, there are so many incredible animated pieces of film and television that are definitely and explicitly for adults and are incredible. And the point of my last video was also not that Moana 2 is like definitively going to be a bad movie. I would not be surprised if it turns out to be very good. Disney still has a very strong track record. The point was that from a creative standpoint, this is a little bit concerning. And please don't dismiss children's media. It's not cool. I need you to know that I'm being 100% sincere when I say that Madame Web very well might be the worst movie ever made. I honestly couldn't even try to guess what the studio executives who cobbled this movie together were even going for. Like, what was the goal here? Not only is there almost no action in this movie, there's also no actual superheroes in this movie. The script is literally laughably bad. Like, there are multiple times in the movie where I could not stop myself from laughing at something that was just so absurd for a character to say out loud. Namely, all of this guy's dialogue, which is very badly ADR'd. And honestly, by the time they got to that point, I can see why they wouldn't even bother making it better, because all of his lines basically amount to him saying, I'm a bad guy, of course I want to do bad things. Like Gargamel from the Smurfs is a more complex character than him. But that's pretty generally true about all of these characters. Like, honestly, the script feels like it was maybe a first draft where they were just trying to outline story points and character tropes before going in and giving them a personality and motivation and interpersonal relationships. But before they got to that point, the studio just said, this works, let's just shoot it that way and have them just say all of this exposition out loud for some reason. Honestly, what sucks the most about this movie is it's completely soulless. It is the epitome of all of the criticisms people have about the superhero genre in general rolled into one thing, and it proves them absolutely right. Like, I'm not saying it's right for every superhero movie ever made, but this movie is so obviously an amalgamation of ideas from people who don't even like movies trying to sell products to an audience they fundamentally don't understand. And it's actually crazy ironic that the plot of this movie is about a character who gets the chance to see into the future and learn from their mistakes of the past to not make them again. And yet, Sony made this movie anyways. There's just a level of meta irony there that is worth appreciating. Are you gonna laugh if you see this movie? Yes. It's very unintentionally funny. Is it worth it though? I don't know. That's up to you and your God. Oh, I'm going to stop you right there with the, of course it's so bad because women take, because yikes. I need to make this explicitly clear, not to adult men who paint Warhammer figures in their mom's basement, but to everyone else. This movie doesn't suck because it's feminist, okay? That probably should have been obvious, but I guess not to everybody. This movie sucks because it's offensive to the very idea of artistic expression, but this movie is in fact not even a little bit feminist. They're all kind of not like other girls, but she's queen pick me over here. For example, one of the first scenes where we get to know her character is all about how she doesn't want to go to this baby shower because then she'll have to hang out with girls. But Adam Scott tells her, don't worry, you can just hang out on the patio, grilling burgers and drinking brewskis with me and the bros. And then when she does have to go inside, all of the women are simpering idiot stereotypes. So classic feminism. I know y'all just can't get enough of being the fanboy that cried woke, but this movie is trying so hard to be everything you want it to be, okay? They dress Sydney Sweeney like an anime character, like throughout the entire movie, and she's so timid and shy and sweet and in her little demure but somehow also provocative outfit. Like, sure, the bad guy is a tech bro, but he's also an immigrant, so I feel like that's a good compromise for you people who fucking hate wokeness, all right? I don't, if you want to hate this movie, you're gonna have to find other reasons reasons than it's woke, because it's decidedly not. On the bright side, there's plenty to criticize here once you're able to step outside of the blinding rage you feel when you see women. So good luck. The early reactions to Dune Part 2 compared it to the Lord of the Rings trilogy in terms of quality and scale and scope in fantasy and sci-fi filmmaking. Now, I'm like the biggest Lord of the Rings fan in the world, and I saw Dune Part 2 last night. So I will give you my spoiler-free review and whether I think it lives up to that very, very high praise. So I absolutely loved Part 1. I've been a long-time Denis Villeneuve fan, and sci-fi fantasy is possibly my favorite genre. Then when the Lord of the Rings comparisons started rolling in, my expectations got even higher, and they were already pretty astronomical. That said, this film is genuinely exquisite in pretty much every regard. Cinematographer Greg Fraser is an absolute genius. I mean, he worked with Villeneuve on the first one. He also did The Batman. Literally, he has some of the most gorgeous shot composition of any cinematographer working today. It's absolutely stunning. But what I honestly found most impressive about this film is the way that it's able to balance the interpersonal relationships and the massive scope of the film. Like, you have the contrast between massive gladiator set pieces that are just beautifully shot, very dramatic, like fight sequences. And then you also have these very intimate interpersonal moments between a ton of different characters. Like, obviously getting to see more of Zendaya's character Chani was absolutely incredible. It's such an interesting love story and they have wonderful chemistry. Florence Pugh's character, Princess Aurelian, isn't in the movie a ton, but I love absolutely everything they did with her character. And the way that the Bene Gesserit interact with each other and their dynamic in this world is something that is so fascinating to me. Rebecca Ferguson remains an absolute standout in this franchise. She is utterly captivating. This role is incredible. Her role in this film has been expanded upon in a really interesting and beautiful way from the first film. It is important to note, though, that the very heavy Middle Eastern influences on this film do ring a little bit hollow, knowing that there's no actual Middle Eastern representation like in the cast or crew. Obviously, the original writer of Dune, Frank Herbert, was clearly inspired by Middle Eastern culture in a very big way, and Denis Villeneuve has, woven that into the spirit of the film. But it's an ongoing conversation that's important to have, what that means when there aren't actual Middle Eastern people involved in the making of this film. This is a consistent problem and issue that we see in sci-fi and fantasy filmmaking with all kinds of different cultures that are kind of being appropriated. And while I think the film is fantastic, it's an important conversation to have alongside the film. I do need to talk about Austin Butler for a second because he is incredible in this film. He absolutely blew me away. He is terrifying in a way that you cannot look away from. One thing this film did excellently is build bigger and better action sequences. His gladiator sequence is stunningly gorgeous, but there's so much more. Like, this film is so much more than I was prepared for. The thing about Part 2 is it does ask a lot of the audience. It does cover a lot of ground. For the first hour or so that I was watching it, while I thought that it was absolutely exquisite, I thought, I don't know if I'm going to end up liking this as much as I liked Part 1. However, the final act of Part 2, where the moral and thematic conclusion of the story really finds itself, is masterful in a way that is hard to articulate until you actually see it. Paul's journey throughout Part 1 and Part 2 reaches such an incredible conclusion at the end of this movie. Obviously, it's not a conclusion because the story goes on, but the narrative structure of the film is so satisfying and so breathtaking. I'm definitely going to be seeing this at least twice more in theaters. Will I be as obsessed with Part 2 as I was with Part 1? I don't know yet. Only time will tell. I will say I think the Lord of the Rings comparison is quite apt. Part 2 definitely feels like the middle of a story, which is very hard to do, but it is incredibly successful in the same ways that The Two Towers were. It ups the action. It never lets you look away. It builds already strong character relationships to new highs. It genuinely feels complete, even though it is the middle of a story. This is truly a masterful feat of filmmaking. Like, this film series is genuinely one of the things that makes me say, wow, what a time to be alive. I feel so lucky. I can't wait to see it again. A raunchy lesbian road trip comedy directed by Ethan Coen, starring Margaret Qualley and Geraldine Viswanathan, is in theaters right now. This has been one of my most anticipated movies. I was incredibly excited just by the concept. I have seen Drive Away Dolls. Let's get into a spoiler-free review. Firstly, I want to establish I am a massive Coen Brothers fan. I had very high expectations going into this. I know who isn't a Coen Brothers fan, right? Like, everybody loves them. They're amazing. But genuinely, they've created some of the films that have been the most impactful in my entire life. Like, Raising Arizona practically raised me. All right. I am obsessed with O Brother Art Thou. So I was very excited for this. I'm also really loving the recent rise of mainstream queer cinema, especially R-rated, unapologetically, explicitly queer, which this movie very much is. I think for for a lot of people, just the concept of this movie is enough to get them to buy a ticket. And I think that's a good thing. I think this movie is absolutely worth seeing. It's a breezy 84 minutes. It's very, very funny. It's classic Coen Brothers humor. And the two leads, Margaret and Geraldine, are both incredible. I love seeing them in this role. They're wonderful. The supporting cast is also great. A lot of kooky characters, another classic Coen Brothers staple. And it does feel familiar in a lot of ways. I do think that this film feels a little bit messy in execution. The thing is, this movie is very intentionally going for a very zany B-movie kind of vibe, and I think it nails that tone. I just think that there are some elements of the film that almost work against each other to create a kind of friction in the movie that doesn't feel naturalistic. Like, the actual plot is very straightforward and simple, but it's trying to introduce these really high-level stakes that never really feel believable and kind of feel out of place at times. I think that there are some editing choices that I found a little bit disruptive, a little bit juvenile, which again, I feel like was trying to go for the tone, but just didn't quite work for me. That said, I think this film is the intentional definition of deeply unserious. You know, it's very clear the way Ethan Coen and Trisha Cook have talked about a loving homage to B movies. They are being quite literal in their definition of that. Yes, I wanted a little bit more from this. Yes, I had some higher expectations, but I laughed a lot and had a great time with this. I think just go in knowing that you're in for an earnest, unserious B movie and you'll have a great time.